Hello my friends, I read a lot of books in the month of April. I don't know how many, but I think it's definitely more than 20. My basket is overfilled this time. Here they are. I'll count them. I know there's 10 in this series, 2 in this series, 4 in this series. 25? I read 25 things this month. That's a lot, and as usual, like I start all of my wrap-ups, I've talked about so many of these in so many different videos, so I asked you, I think last time, how you want me to handle wrap-ups and structure them if I've talked about everything already in vlogs. And somebody said something about like not every book needs the same amount of attention, and I think that's how I need to think of things, rather than thinking, okay, every book gets 2 minutes, discuss the synopsis, favorite things about it, blah blah blah. I'll just focus on the ones that I think are conducive to a bigger conversation. Oh wait, 26 things. I read most of this in April, but the last like 20 pages on the 1st of May. Anyway, I'm gonna leave the ones that I haven't talked to you at all about until the very end. So you might have just most recently seen my childhood favorites video where I read 15 of my favorite books. It's supposed to be like from 8th grade, but I wanted to read the entirety of the Jordan Nicholson series, even though technically in 8th grade I would have only read the first 2 or 3 books in the series. But I just wanted to get through it. I wanted the nostalgia. I got it, along with some other things. A lot of language and representation I didn't love, but it was the fun series that I remember. We get to see Georgia, who is a 14-year-old from England, and her friend group, and her time at school, and her relationship with her parents, but mostly these 3 main boys that she is dating or interested in throughout the series, and just like getting to see her first kiss and her first relationship and all of that fun stuff was cool to reflect on. I'm not rating them individually, nor am I rating really any of the things that I read in my childhood favorites video. I read a couple things from Fear Street, and this one is like the origin of this Fear family and witch trials, and upon rereading this I didn't remember a ton of it. I know I enjoy the Fear Street series, but I'm having a hard time pinpointing which ones I've read and which ones I loved. I picked up 2 and thought they were safe, but they weren't exactly what I remember, and I think it's just because it's not the main series that I thought that I was reading. My mistake. This one's about like a killer and Valentine's Day. They were both just okay. Then I read Kissed by an Angel by Elizabeth Chandler, which is about a girl who can see angels, believes in angels, and then her boyfriend dies and he becomes an angel and tries to communicate with her, and it was very strange and not quite what I remember. This is the whole series, but this is the only one that I read when I was like 14, and definitely worth it for the video, but yeah, it was a strange read. The most successful reread of the video was The Undomestic Goddess by Sophie Kinsella, which was one of my favorite books in high school. It's about a woman named Samantha who's a lawyer, and she messes up at work and flees, like loses millions of dollars for the company, and then ends up on this random family's doorstep. They think she's there for a housekeeping position. They just like hire her on the spot because she's overqualified, and she just decides to go along with it. It's a mistaken identity, but she definitely takes advantage of the situation because she doesn't know what else to do with her life. She falls in love with the gardener. It's a really fun time. It also tackles some good conversations about like what's expected of women in the workforce and feminism, and some really good stuff in a lighthearted environment. I also reread Chicken Soup for the Teenage Soul volume 4. Listen, Roman numerals really got me all fucked up this month. I read this in a vlog and I missed the number in the crown, and it was very embarrassing. If you don't know, Chicken Soup is a series of books. I don't even know how to explain it or how many have come out, but these ones were specifically aimed at teenagers. They were stories, like personal stories written by adults, and then a couple written by teens who just like submitted their stories, and they're supposed to help, you know, guide teens or help in some way to feel like you're not alone. They're like these relatable stories, but also these stories of hardship. I think they can be inspirational, or they can be a reflection of what you're going through. And I thought, what did I think? it was just okay. I'm clearly not the target audience, so like, you know what I mean? Next one is That Way Madness Lies. 15 of Shakespeare's most notable works reimagined. I got it that time. This is edited by Dahlia Adler, and it features a bunch of authors who are putting their modern spin on William Shakespeare's beloved classics. I loved this short story collection. It's one of my favorites. It'll be one of my most recommended of all time. I really respect what I interpret as like a real openness to whatever the author wanted to do in their story. Every single story is completely different. Like, that's what makes an anthology so good to me, when it is this idea of reimaginings, because they could have easily all been told in a similar vein, like with a similar setting or a similar idea, but instead there was poetry, there was like more traditional narratives, there were stories that were like using the direct characters, like with the exact same names and the same relationship, and just putting them in modern times, but then also stories that just like were clearly inspired by the idea of a Shakespeare play and didn't fully reference anything directly. And it just made it so fun because I never knew what I was going to be in for in the next story. I never got bored, and I remembered to note my rating for every single story so I could tell you my favorites, which are Taming of the Soulmate by Kate Ancrum, King of the Fairies by Anne-Marie McLemore, We Have Seen Better Days by Lily Anderson, all authors I've read before. And then also I loved I Bleed by Dahlia Adler, His Invention by Brittany Cavallaro, Partying is Such Sweet Sorrow by Kirsten White. I gave out so many 5 out of 5s, you guys. I read this in 24 hours for a vlog, and if I remember correctly, I reviewed every individual story. So check that out for my full thoughts. And then also in that vlog, I picked up A Midsummer Night's Dream because of the nostalgia. I picked up a couple books in this edition collection because they're so beautiful, and apparently influenced a lot of you to do the same. I've been tagged in so many stories this week and posts of people buying this, and I don't know why they don't sell it as a box set. Probably because there's like 40 of them and I can't even imagine what that price is, but like, I wish they made it a little easier to buy all of them. Not that I should, but I want to. Oh, and my rating is already a 5 out of 5 for this play, but we also got, I don't know how many, it feels like 30 pages at the very beginning of like an introduction to Shakespeare, an examination of the text, a nice little intro, and I thought that definitely added something to this and made me not regret my decision at all to get the Pelican edition. Next up, let's talk about The Raven Boys. I'm going to act like I haven't reviewed this 17 times on my channel already. The Raven Boys is a series where we follow a girl named Blue, and she's from a family of psychics, but she's not a psychic, but she has this power to like enhance other people's abilities. She gets introduced to these boys from like this fancy school who she wants nothing to do with, and they are on this mission to find a buried Welsh king, because if you find this king, you will get like a wish. I can't imagine anyone is here who hasn't heard me pitch this, but I know there must be someone out there. So like, if you've never heard of this before, if you're brand new here, comment me a little bird emoji so I know that you exist. This is my favorite series of all time. It progresses to get more and more magical, but it still has a real world setting, which I love so much. There are certain developments that are really shocking in here as far as like a YA paranormal kind of romance story goes. Blue has relationships with some different boys in the series, and then some of the boys have different relationships, and they're all very lovely, and I love all these characters. Upon reread, a shocking development is I bumped my favorite book from The Dream Thieves to Blue Lily Lily Blue. I don't know who I am right now, but I have a new ranking of my favorite to least favorite in the series, and that's all I have to say. Next up, I read a couple books also in a vlog, but they were all like 5 stars, so I should of course take the opportunity to pitch them again in case you didn't see that vlog. This is Mrs. Death by Selena Godin, and it is a really uniquely written story where we're following the personification of death as this woman who's writing her memoirs, but she's working with this writer, and they basically go through all of the different deaths that Mrs. Death has had to witness, and her and Wolf connect on the different things that they have experienced and have their traumas unpacked. It's just such an interesting commentary on death, and the way that it's written in a mixture of like direct to reader language and then also poetry, and then also just this beautiful language being used to tell the stories of death throughout the ages, humanity's perspective on death, from people who have a desperation for life to people who have decided to take their own lives. Famous deaths in history and infamous killers, they get an interesting focus in here, new kind of stories given to them, and it overall just has this really ominous tone that I enjoyed so much. Overall, I was really impressed by it. The next one is another short story collection. This is by Suvan Kim Tamavagsa, and it's called How to Pronounce Knife, and it follows families and people from Laos coming to North America. It's all of these small moments of strength and ambition and desperation involved in starting a new life and coming to a new country. Some are more lighthearted, some are fun, some are silly, they can be really sad, and some of them didn't even have a tone. They just like, they were just about the existence of human beings and experiences. I think my favorite ones had this theme of the idea of people having to work twice as hard for half the recognition, how there continues to be prejudice and inequality everywhere, and how white mediocrity is continuing to prevail. My favorites in here, well, since I rated this a 5, I don't know if it's really valuable telling you all of my ratings because most of them were 5s. The title story, How to Pronounce Knife, was perfect. Randy Travis is one of my favorites. Chickachi was fantastic. I don't know why you like, is it even valuable to share my favorite? I guess it is. Like, I'm thinking of it like, if I'm giving this as a recommendation, it's like nobody's just gonna read one story out of here that I said was my favorite. But maybe like when you're reading, knowing my favorites, not that you'll remember which were my favorites while you're reading, but maybe it gives you an extra cool element. I don't know what I'm saying. Edge of the World was a 5. The School Bus Driver was a 5. Ooh, Irk was a 5. A Far Distant Thing. And the last one, Picking Worms, was probably my absolute favorite. First and last, really strong. And then I also have A History of My Brief Body by Billy Ray Belcourt, which is a memoir, another uniquely written thing that I read this month. And it was just really impressive how in a short thing we got this like intimate look at just Billy's life in Drift Pile First Nation, but then also managed to pan out and look at entire communities and the entire world at the same time. It had a really good balance of those things. We talked about colonial violence and gender and sexuality, certain shame involved, different access. There were like sweet moments from his life, there were impossible moments from his life. There was a conversation about suicide in First Nations communities and also like the government's reaction to suicide in First Nation communities. Huge issues that exist in this country, but also just like threw in lots of just little thoughts, little perspectives, little stories. I heard somebody use the word meandering for this book, and that is like something that really sells me on books. I love a meandering plot, so that can definitely be a downside for some people, but just like the not fully formed thoughts, that's what I loved about this. It didn't feel like a completed piece of work. It was just like one paragraph on gender, just like a thought that he was having about gender. We had pages like this where it was just like a couple thoughts on a page that kind of went together but didn't really, and it was all really wonderful, and I gave it a 5-star. Next up is the book club pick, Every Value Break by Peter Swanson. I will be doing a live show with Elias at some point. I haven't announced the date yet, so I obviously don't want to get too into it because then I'll have nothing to discuss in the live show. But it is about a married couple, newly married. They Abigail and Bruce go on their honeymoon, and suddenly there's this man that shows up on this secluded island who Abigail recognizes because she had like a one-night stand with him at her bachelorette party. She has to decide how to get rid of this guy, but also like the decision if she should tell her husband or not, and like, is she in danger or not? Can we even trust her? Many things to think about. My final rating for this, I'm sad to say, is a 3. I think anybody who's read this will like already know why it's a 3. I think this book was really intentional with the choices that it made and the time that it's written, and I think that almost took away from my reading experience the fact that it felt like it was really trying to do something, and like maybe it succeeded at that thing, but it still just took me out of it a little. I will say atmosphere, amazing. The tension was great. The reading experience itself was really fun. Like, I had a good time, but it's not so much a mystery when you already get a feel for what the author is doing. I will without a doubt continue to pick up Peter Swanson. This just wasn't everything that I hoped. And it's hard picking book club books because sometimes the domestic thrillers are the ones that are just like a little too basic, but they're also the ones that I have the most fun reading. But it's the type of thriller that often leads to a pretty mediocre rating. I'm willing to risk it because I want to find some favorites, but this one just wasn't it. And I left the Mirror season for last because I actually want to fully spoil this book for some people. I had a really tough time with this book. I think part of the reason that I read so many things this month is because I was a little triggered by the subject matter and just needed to read 7,000 other things to forget about this experience. That's not to say that the book was not good or necessary or anything, and I'm actually not going to rate it. I just don't really feel comfortable rating this book, but I do want to talk about it full out because I think that the way that certain things happen and get revealed, I feel like sometimes the trigger warning of just like the inclusion of sexual assault may not be thorough enough. So I want to be able to talk about some other things. But this story revolves around these two characters, Ciela and Locke, who both experience sexual assault at the same party, and the book focuses on them like coming together and starting a friendship and relationship. But Ciela knows more about the event than Locke does. Locke knows that something happened, but he had been drugged, and Ciela knows more about it than he does. And it's like this decision of how much to tell him and when to tell him, and also dealing with her own trauma at the same time. This is a deeply personal story from AM, and the author's note is really important to read, so I hope people read that. And I think this was really, really brave to write. I also think it's really important that these stories get told, and that there's like certain representation. I don't know how else to word that. It's so important to shed light on rape culture and sexual violence, and I feel like a lot of times boys and men who experience that, especially that group, there's a lot of stigma involved. It's completely underrepresented, and boys who are victims need to feel supported. So it's absolutely terrible that these stories need to be told, but it is really important. So that's the story. If you want to leave, I'll see you later. Please comment below anything that you thought about any of my other reviews, and I'll see you in my next video. For those of you who are sticking around because you want to know more before you read, or you've already read it, or you have no plans on reading it, I just don't know how to go on talking about this book and not talking about like who the perspective is from and like what really happened at the party, because it feels like it's like an intended twist in the book not a twist, but like it's a reveal. Throughout the book, we don't know the full details of the party, and neither does Locke. Ciela knows everything because she was forced to, I don't want to say commit the act of violence, but they were forced to have a sexual encounter. She was forced to perform a sexual act on him. And the book is from her perspective. So I want to be so specific with my language because she is a victim. They are both victims of this group of people who forced this on them. So she is not at fault. She is not the perpetrator. However, the way that it's written, it feels like you're reading from the perspective of the perpetrator. It is extremely graphic in its language. And I feel like it's one thing to go into a book knowing that it involves sexual violence, but not knowing that you are going to read from a specific perspective, I think will catch a lot of people off guard. But because it's intended to be a reveal, and like that kind of is important to the goal of the storyline, and because I haven't seen anybody else talk about that aspect in their reviews, like I just don't know if that's something that should be talked about in the reviews. It's such an important book, and it's gonna allow so many people to feel seen. And I don't want it to come across like that's a critique of the book, which is actually the only reason I don't want to give a rating for this, because any rating that I give that isn't perfect, because this wasn't a 5-star, but I don't want to come across like I think that the book did something wrong. And if I put out a number out there, it looks like those things are associated, and they're absolutely not. And at the same time, like I don't want to talk about this book ever again. I don't love certain things that the book did in regards to, again, I feel it's so important that characters and people feel like they have the right to reclaim certain things. Overcoming trauma is not a linear experience, and the book does that super well. How she goes in and out of different memories, and the process of healing is so different for everybody. And there's nothing inherently wrong with the idea that their healing comes from them involving in a sexual romantic relationship. So that too is not a critique of the book, but it's not something that I loved to see, just because when they did have sex, he had not yet been made aware that she is the one who was involved in his sexual assault. And again, I do think that the book probably objectively handled it well, because she wanted to tell him, and she is dealing with her own trauma at the same time. And he like goes out of his way to say like, I don't want you to tell me anything about that night, like I can't take it. So she is in the right, but also it's just like a really, really difficult thing to read, that this boy engaged in a relationship without fully getting to have the knowledge of the experience that they had already had together. It's just really tough to talk about this book, but I don't think I've seen anybody fully review it. And when I say I've said this before, I haven't seen anybody fully review it, doesn't mean that people haven't fully reviewed it. It means that I myself haven't gone out and found somebody who has fully reviewed it. And if they have, like I'm not out here looking to discuss this any further. I don't want to continue to have conversations about this book, but I really did want to review it, and now I'm done with it. I'm sure something came across wrong there. Like I do not have hard feelings with this book. I'm not giving like an objective opinion on it. So please don't think I'm coming for it, because like I said, it's a super personal story from this author, and that really, really needs to be respected. I'm gonna go. I don't know how I'm gonna hold up all of these books for my thumbnail, but I will see you later. Thank you so much for watching. If you stayed till the very end, give me a little flower emoji. That would be great. I'll see you later. Bye.